Education has crossed the Rubicon in 2020. What we thought we knew is no longer applicable, and in the struggle to stay relevant, we have lost many aspects of our profession and gained many more. This presentation will focus on the three tenses of education. It will give a brief history of education, dividing it into the past, education prior to 1717, the present, education from 1717 to 2020, and the future, 2021 onwards. It will discuss what we know, what we thought we knew, and what we definitely do not know. The main focus of the discussion will be on what we have learned from the chaos that was 2020, how we can apply the new ideas and progressive technology, and how we can handle the new students. Education has not only changed from a teacher's perspective, but also from that of the student. We tend to forget that students were not the only ones who were severely disrupted during this pandemic. Our students had to learn an entirely new method of schooling. And although the majority of our students are proficient in the use of technology, we expected so much more of them. COVID-19 has possibly caused some of the most dramatic changes and developments that have taken place in the education to date, and we need to be ready to face the many challenges to come. Adapt or die is not a new concept in education. It started long ago with the creation of public schools. The reasoning behind the creation of public school system is simple. Schools provide a particular kind of education. It teaches freedom, civic virtue, economic efficiency, social stability, and social mobility. That is the idea. But what happened in practice? Soon after the creation of public education, it became clear that the primary role of education was not to uplift and enlighten, but to act as a form of social control. So where did all these ideas come from? In ancient Greece, specifically Sparta, young men were educated for the specific purpose of creating a powerful army. They learned how to read and write so they could convey messages for military purposes. Education seems to have served one function: to subdue and control the younger generation and conform them to the ideas of the elders. This process continued through the ages and culminated in our modern society during the rule of the Prussian king, Frederick William I. He created the first national school system in Europe in 1717, once again to train obedient soldiers. His successors followed the same strict disciplinary system and believed that the king had to govern like a father. It is his duty to see, think, and act for the whole community. The idea of compulsory public education spread through Europe and eventually found its way to England. But the compulsory collectivist principle represented quite a clash with the individualist tradition in England. In the United States of America, public schooling and compulsory schooling went through several changes, and various laws were passed to ensure that children went to school as dictated. By 1918, every state required students to complete elementary school. Throughout all of this, the idea that children should be trained to be obedient, passive citizens was prevalent. It seemed, by the middle of the 20th century, that this was the way to go. Education was doing a good job. And then everything changed. In the USA, the Black Power movement and the Vietnam War resulted in student protests all through the 1960s and early 70s. Suddenly, students found that they could stand up against the establishment that they could raise their voices and have an influence on their environment, politics, religion, and society. Where previously the state worked hard to keep those voices under restraint, it was now faced with anarchy and revolt. The next major step in the education revolution came in 1989, when the United Nations General Assembly adopted a set of minimum standards for the protection of the rights of children in all capacities through the Convention of the Rights of the Child. The Convention is the most widely ratified international instrument with 196 states. By 2015, the United States was the only country that has not ratified the Convention. The acknowledgement of the rights of children put an effective end to child labor and corporal punishment in many countries. It also opened the door for children to have a greater say in how they wanted to be treated in schools, at home, and by society. Once again, students started to dictate to society. Naturally, education had to adapt to the new norm. Parents began protesting harsh discipline in schools, and teachers could no longer whip out a stick if homework was not done. Education had to change again, and change it did. The groundwork was laid for new ways to educate children, to make them interested and keep them constructively occupied. Enter learner-centered education and the flipped classroom. During the first 2 decades of the 21st century, students and teachers alike were adapting to project-based learning and the idea that a teacher is more a facilitator than a speaker. We started to get used to having more and better technology at our disposal, and things were running smoothly. Then came the War of the Worlds, where the Earth got invaded by micro-aliens. COVID-19 spread like wildfire and completely upset the apple cart. Suddenly, teachers and students were milling about like wild horses on the bank of a raging river. Few had any idea how to cross it, and many felt that it shouldn't be crossed at all, that we should adopt a wait-and-see attitude. We had to think fast, learn even faster, and adapt at an astronomical rate. We Zoomed and YouTubed and did what we could to learn how to manage the system, and all the while we were half drowning. Where students were used to being physically guided by a teacher, they now had to adapt to video conferencing, LMS learning, and generally doing things by themselves and for themselves. All at once, the support platform of face-to-face learning was ripped from beneath their feet, and they had to learn how to self-motivate and let go of their inhibitions by showing their faces, and in many cases their homes, on video. According to the United Nations Policy Brief on Education, the COVID-19 pandemic has created the largest disruption of education systems in history, affecting nearly 1.6 billion learners in more than 190 countries on all continents. The brief also states that some 23.8 million additional children and youth from pre-primary to tertiary may drop out or not have access to school this year due to the pandemic's economic impact alone. Although these numbers do not seem relevant in our immediate context, as South Korea has a remarkable infrastructure available for distance learning, we as teachers could benefit the underprivileged communities by sharing our expertise and experiences about what we have learned during 2020. So, what did we learn? How can we apply what we have learned? And how do we accommodate the new type of student? Before I answer these questions, a word of caution. There are 3 important aspects to keep in mind when looking at the future of education. The first is change. People are by nature reluctant to get out of their comfort zones. We do not embrace change easily, and teachers should therefore work this aspect into their own development and planning. The second factor is motivation. It is all good and well to rely on research that claims that online teaching is the way to go, but if a student is not intrinsically motivated, he will not get the benefit of the freedom to learn at his own pace. Boundaries must be set to guide students into time limits for tasks in order to get them to participate in a timely fashion and to keep them accountable for their own learning. The third and most important aspect is choice. Choose your medium, your content, and your presentations carefully. Through all the research done for this paper, it has become clear that educators and the education system is somewhat rudderless at the moment. One should be careful not to just jump on the bandwagon and simply follow the trends. What worked for a school in Cape Cod, where there are 5 students in a class, will definitely not work in an environment where one teacher has to work with 30 students or more. That being said, let us look at what we have learned from the chaos of 2020. Although education has been turned upside down during the past year, our resilience and commitment to education has not faltered. For the first time in generations, all stakeholders endeavored to assist in the learning process. Parents, students, teachers, and business came together to create a workable solution, albeit not a perfect one. We have learned that we could stretch our limits far beyond our initial perceptions and that we could be quite innovative. Learning new concepts was not only limited to teachers, but was embraced by all who are involved in the education sector. We also learned that we need to take care of ourselves. The immense pressure of COVID-19 and its consequences have ravaged teachers all over the globe, and looking after our own well-being has become an integral part of our performance strategies. We have learned to be more creative in our thinking, planning, and presentation. If we were camera shy before COVID-19, we became superstars during 2020. Creativity also involved finding ways in which to engage our students and keep them effectively occupied. One of the most important things we realized is that less is more. Online teaching is all about quality, not quantity. At first, most of us simply transferred our regular lessons to an online platform and expected students to generate the same output as before. But it soon became clear that lessons had to be streamlined. The shift from a classroom's controlled environment to the relative uninhibited home environment restricted the study time of many students, who sometimes were expected to take care of siblings and other tasks in the home. This effectively limited their academic focus and caused a lot of strain for our students and frustrations for teachers who expected the same dedication from their students as before 2020. In an article in the Korea Times of 2 February 2021, it explored the new trend among Korean university students to take a break from studying because they are not satisfied with the quality of online teaching. This is a great cause of concern for university administrators and teachers alike. It will result in a loss of revenue for the universities and therefore may cost many teachers their jobs. We need to ensure that our lessons and presentation are worth the time and money our students have to put into their education. It is clear that world education is extremely fragile at the moment. Teachers are losing their lives to COVID, and students are losing their education because of a lack of infrastructure and funding. This put the focus back on inequality, not only in education, but also in various other social and economic structures. Where online teaching and homeschooling used to hover on the periphery of formal education, it has now become the center of attention. What we don't know yet is how this type of schooling will affect our children and ultimately our society in the long run. Homeschooling and Zooming limits social interaction. It inhibits creative movement and allows students to disappear behind a broken web link. Teachers have a tremendous task to foster social interaction, creativity, and motivation. They cannot do it alone. Linked to this is the importance of proper training. Due to the speed with which the pandemic escalated, there was no time to train teachers properly in the use of new technology like Zoom or the effective use of the LMS. This caused a lot of frustration, but also prompted teachers to set out to learn these things on their own through the web and YouTube. Attending webinars and chat groups for teachers have become some of the most important teacher development platforms. Technology has developed at the speed of light during this past year. Many existing companies like Microsoft and Google have gone out of their way to create new ways to communicate and engage with students. However, we are now faced with such an overwhelming amount of edtech and gadgets available that it has become difficult to decide on what to use. The best way to approach this is to listen to other educators. Talk to them about what worked for them and what didn't. A few helpful websites are teacher-made, where you can create interactive worksheets for free, and Canva, where you can create comic strips, posters, infographics, and many more. It is very important not to sacrifice simplicity on the altar of creativity. By finding edtech that works for you, you can be creative, productive, and efficient. The COVID era has taught us many things. We learned to think on our feet. We learned to collaborate more and to find new ways of doing old things. We are facing a precarious future, that is true, but in working together and finding common ground, we will succeed in making effective education the pinnacle of our modern society again.